So the next item on our list is brokerage, and I asked to take this one on. And from my perspective, there's some coaching here for you all as brokers on the whether you're on the agency side or the tenant rep side. This provision really is not intended for you to outline what your fee is going to be. What it's protecting you all as the broker is that you're on the transaction. So you're named in the document as participating in the transaction, typically representing one side or the other. So please don't use this paragraph in the lease to outline your fee structure, even if you're on the tenant side, right? That's between you and the broker in a co-brokerage agreement. Now that takes us down the road of that co-brokerage agreement. So what I see oftentimes is the agency broker is negotiating with the tenant rep broker a fee structure that may not be in the listing agreement. You don't have the right to do that. The landlord has a contractual agreement with the agency broker as to what the fee structure is for that co-broker. So just because you feel it's equitable to pay that co-broker more on renewals, for example, you may think that's a fair thing to do, and it's a market thing to do, but it's not in the listing agreement with you and the landlord. So you've just now violated the listing agreement if you ask me as the broker to sign that co-brokerage agreement that is not in line with the listing agreement. So that's always the first question I ask when I get co-brokerage agreements to sign off on. Is it in line with the listing agreement? And if it's not, then I want something from the landlord stating that they agree to the change. It could be an email that, yes, in this particular transaction, I'm agreeing to pay on renewals at this rate. So we have something to put in the file that covers it, okay? The indemnity issue, right? So you're going to be seeing whether you're on tenant side or landlord side that another broker pops into the equation after the fact and said, well, I'm the one that showed the tenant that space to pay me. Who should indemnify who in that case?
This happens a lot. Remember, Florida is a procuring cause state. So absent a written brokerage agreement, the broker who is the procuring cause of the transaction is entitled to a commission, and that becomes a basis of lots of lawsuits. You're going to see a provision in the lease with respect to brokerage that says this is the landlord's broker, this is the tenant's broker, and each of the parties is going to indemnify the other for any third-party broker that shows up and claims through that party. So if the third-party broker that shows up says, well, I showed the tenant the space, and in fact he had, and that was the case, the landlord has the right to look at the tenant to say, hey, this one's on you. You are indemnifying me for this. I am not paying that commission, and you're going to have to defend the lawsuit that I get sued in for that situation. Now, if the landlord is not smart, I've got in trouble for saying county court judges are stupid, so the landlord is not smart, and he has more than one broker showing his space, and those two brokers start fighting over it. Again, the tenant gets pulled in that lawsuit. The tenant has the right to say to the landlord, hey, I just showed up to look at space. These are two brokers that you engaged or you have that you're dealing with or claiming to each other. You're indemnifying me for getting pulled in this lawsuit. So it really becomes a fact-intensive inquiry as to where is that third-party broker coming from and who is the party that they're claiming they're representing. Because the broker just can't show up and say, oh, I put the two parties together. They have to take sides. They have to say, oh, I showed the tenant the space. That means they were the tenant's broker. Or the landlord told me I could show the space, and I brought these other people over to take a look at.
So I'm going to tell you a true story, case study. I'm on the agency side of a building that is 100,000 square feet, and the prospective tenant is 100,000 square feet. So it's a full building user. And this tenant was represented by broker A 6 months ago. They took the tenant out into the market, did a walkthrough. I'm telling you, it wasn't more than 5 or 10 minutes, and the tenant said, no, no good, not for me. And that's the last I ever heard from him, 6 months ago. Broker B shows up 6 months later with that tenant. And, smart me say, I think that I need to get coverage here. So I asked the broker B, I want a letter from that tenant stating that broker B is in fact their broker of record representing them on that transaction. So now my file's covered, so I think. The transaction is completed, it's 100,000 square feet, it's a 10-year deal, it's a monster fee, particularly to the tenant rep. And lo and behold, we have a press release, and broker A from 6 months ago reads the press release, timeout. I showed the building 6 months ago. Now I'm thinking, well, the tenant is not acknowledging that broker, and I have it in writing, so I'm covered. Sure enough, we get served. Landlord gets served, and my broker's company gets served, as does broker B, who is the one saying I represent the tenant. Long story short, the lease covered landlord because the tenant in the lease indemnified the landlord that if such an event should occur, it's on me, and I'm going to indemnify your landlord. Guess what? Tenant hasn't occupied yet, and it's 100,000 feet on 10 years, and the tenant said, I've changed my mind. I don't care what the lease says. I'm not going to indemnify it. You guys figure it out, or I'm going to just walk away. So it's contrary to the lease, it's contrary to what's law, but now the landlord and my company and the others, we're three of us are in the room, like, well, now what do we do? Are we going to just pound our fist on the table and let this 100,000 square foot tenant walk away or go into court? So guess what? Broker A got paid a full fee as if they had done the deal because their attorney convinced our three attorneys that court law was that you physically bring a tenant to a building and walk them inside, that's procuring cause. And it didn't matter that it was 6 months ago. And it didn't matter that the tenant, said I don't run with that guy. So
A best practice is going, if you are the leasing broker on a building, you've got to keep a log. You have to keep a really careful record of who comes and looks at your building, who the brokerage comes in, have people sign in and track that stuff so you can say to your principals, hey, we've had the same tenant show up with two different brokers, and you can do the best you can to protect yourself in that situation.
So what would you do differently?
Yeah.
well, I don't know that I could have done anything differently. I had everything papered.
Right.
But I think my point is that if you physically walk into a building with a tenant rep broker and that tenant, it doesn't matter how long ago it was, maybe it does, but all of a sudden stamp procuring costs, right? So really, I think I papered my file pretty good. I think my point really is, despite what might be the legal documentation, right? You got a choice. Do you go to court or do you take a 100,000 foot tenant? And the landlord is like, hey, this is chump change compared to the value of a 100,000 foot tenant in an empty building. So that's where we went.
I hope that doesn't encourage anybody to hear to misbehave.
Just on brokerage agreements, I can't stress enough the importance of getting really clearly drafted brokerage agreements. So on your listing agreements, make sure that you've got, remember we talked about the very beginning of this, make sure you get the right party interest, make sure you got the entity that owns the property. Don't sign a listing agreement with the guy's property manager. Don't sign it with some other entity that he owns. Make sure you go and you look at the deed, make sure you got the right party interest, and you go to Sunbiz and make sure you got the right entity. So you're tracking all that through so you have the right party interest. So when you have to sue in that brokerage agreement, you're suing the fee owner of the property. Second thing is, get everything laid out as specific as you can. The brokerage agreements that I look at from the big companies are great, they're well drafted, but get them signed. I can't count the number of times I've had one signed by, the broker signs and sends it to the landlord, and the landlord never signs it and sends it back, and deals start happening. And that's not a good situation either. So best practices point, get them right, get them signed, put them in your file.